Despite a poor start to the season, it appears this Royals bullpen has bounced back. What changed in these couple of weeks? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about myself, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some co-hosting, doing some producing, and hosting as well from time to time. I'll actually be on Friday night from 5 to 11 p.m. doing some coverage of day 2 in the NFL draft. So that's where you can catch me this coming week, or these coming days, I should say, over on 810 WHB. But you do know when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, we won't be talking NFL draft. We won't be talking really any other team. It's going to be strictly based on the Kansas City Royals for a full 30 straight minutes. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. Even though the tournament has ended, college basketball that is, NBA playoffs is in full swing. Baseball is, of course, just kickstarting, but we're about 24, 25 games into the year. So go get started on PrizePicks, start winning some money, and use the code that we will be giving you a little bit later on in today's show. So again, PrizePicks, our title sponsor for today's episode. Well, I did lie to everybody last night. I said that I was going to get a podcast episode up after the game, but I'm going to be busy as well after tonight's game. So I thought before I head out to Kauffman Stadium tonight, was going to get a 30-minute episode up and running, just so you have some pregame coverage here, some stuff to talk about, maybe some stuff you have questions on and want to save them for the Bag Friday. That's just what the plan is going to be today. Tomorrow, probably coming out around the same time as it does tonight. And then on Friday for a mailbag edition, it will likely be in the morning, actually, now that I think about it, because as I just mentioned, I'll be doing draft coverage from 5 to 11 p.m. So I won't have time to come home and do the podcast before I have to head back to the studio and do that show. So I lied about it being after tonight's game. So if you're waiting for some takeaways on that, you'll have to wait for tomorrow's episode. But as for today's episode, we are going to start it with this bullpen. And a bullpen that after last night, you feel much better about. And really, it's not just last night. It has been over the course of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, this Royals bullpen has come into shape. And I do think there was a moment in April where everything shifted. Everything changed. And I think some of you will know where I'm going with this. But it goes back to the first series against the White Sox. It was game 2. I was about to say it was the first game of that series. It wasn't. It was actually game 2. Game 2 of that series was a close one. Game 1, it was close for about the first 5 to 6 innings, and the Royals blew the doors off the White Sox bullpen in the 7th of the 8th inning, and they ended up scoring double-digit runs on that night. Game 2, I was out at Kauffman Stadium. The Royals had a very slim lead. Brady Singer had pitched well in this game. A couple other guys had come in out of the bullpen to bridge the gap into the 9th. And Matt Quatraro went with Will Smith despite his struggles on the road and despite his struggles to begin the year. But on that night, Will Smith climbed the bump. He strikes out the first hitter he faced. But going into that inning, James McArthur was still warming up. Like, there was not full confidence in Will Smith. And then Will Smith gives up the double, the one-out double to Luis Robert, the play in which he got hurt on and hasn't returned since. And then he walks the next batter, I believe. So it's first and second. Matt Quatraro has the quick hook. He goes to James McArthur, who came in, got the double play ball with Andrew Vaughn, and has taken command of that closer's role ever since. He has been the best version of himself since he took over that role. And when he got that role solidified, everybody else kind of slid into a role as well, because the bullpen was really good on that homestand. They carried it into the road trip a little bit. There were some mishaps here and there. Chris Stratton's 4-walk performance against the New York Mets in the finale. There were some runs that were allowed in game 2 as well, when the Royals put up 11 in Queens against the Mets. And then when they also played It was Baltimore for that series, and I'm blanking on one other series. It was the White Sox series in Chicago. I think there were a couple of moments where the bullpen wasn't as sharp either. And you felt like the closer they got to figuring out everybody's best attributes, everybody's comfort position, you saw this group really take off. And that's why I think last night looked the way it did. Chris Stratton now knows when he's coming into ball games. John Schreiber knows when he's coming into ball games. James MacArthur can be ready for the ninth. He also can have a 6-out save, assuming he didn't have a 6-out save the night before. So if the Royals are in the same spot as they were last night, do not envision them using James MacArthur for 6 more outs to close out the game. Tonight, if it's close, I'd expect Angel Serpa to get some work. I'd expect somebody like Nick Anderson to get some work. I did not think that John Schreiber threw a ton of pitches, so he's probably still available. But the Royals will be flexible in that department. And I think this is the bullpen that I originally thought was going to be just fine. In the beginning of the year, it's easy to panic about certain situations, and that bullpen wasn't good. But I'll also say this. It wasn't a collective unit problem. It was really one reliever. Now, not everybody was pitching well. Chris Stratton wasn't pitching that well. You also looked at Nick Anderson. He wasn't pitching that well. But I did some digging on the numbers. Right now, the Royals are number 9 in the league in bullpen ERA. They're still putting too many base runners on, but you'll take top 10 in ERA considering where that group was last year. And Carlos Hernandez was out on a rehab assignment this week, so you're hoping in the next couple of weeks, maybe by early to mid-May, you get one of your flamethrowers back in the bullpen, assuming things progress nicely. But I did some digging on the numbers, and I got asked the question, well, that's a great ERA for a bullpen. It's sub 4, I believe it is. Actually, I think it is sub 3 at this point, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's around the 2.8 range. So you take that in a heartbeat. If you are top 10 in Major League Baseball in bullpen ERA, you are doing just fine. But I asked this question, I think it was from Jerry, and he said, well, what do the numbers look like without Will Smith? And that did spark some interest in me. I had actually put out a tweet last week, or maybe it was the week before. I think it was Friday, actually, about the numbers that Will Smith had allowed compared to the bullpen. The bullpen minus Will Smith has given up 16 runs in 69 innings. Will Smith has given up 11 runs himself. So you subtract Will Smith, and you just throw in another name there that hasn't pitched yet at the big league level. That bullpen ERA goes to 2.22. That would be third best in baseball. A really good bullpen. Top 5. Still not getting the strikeouts. I do believe that can be a problem in the future. They're still putting too many guys on base. That can be a problem, but they're getting out of jams. And maybe that's the best place to start, is that you're not, completely imploding on the mound. But that, to me, is why the bullpen's numbers didn't look that good early on. Will Smith was not pitching well at all. He was disastrous out there. But now maybe he's in a role where he had a clean outing on Sunday. It was a very low leverage spot. The Royals were down a handful of runs. And maybe you throw him out there when the Royals are already chasing 4 to 5 runs and you just need some work out of the bullpen. That, to me, might be the best option for him. Or you could always have that Phantom IL stint, and Walter Pennington, who's been tearing it up in AAA, could take his spot as a left hand in the bullpen. But I don't think they're going to make that move already in April. I think they still believe Will Smith can be a valuable reliever to this bullpen, whether we like it or we don't like it. I do not think they're going to punt on a free agent deal this early into the season. They're hoping he can get a couple of scoreless outings under his belt, and then you feel fine, right? Then you feel much better about the direction of this bullpen. Right now, I'm not finding too many negatives. There are, I would say, less than optimal things about this bullpen. The strikeout problems is going to be an issue for this team if they can't get that fixed. Because if you aren't striking out anybody, you're just relying on the soft contact. And when you can't induce the soft contact, you're going to get knocked around. Now, Carlos Hernandez can help that. I think Walter Pennington can help that. John McMillan, if he ever gets his velocity back, can help that trend. So you have a lot of guys right now that are just getting outs, and that's fine. If you're throwing strikes, you have good control, and you're getting outs, that's all that really matters in the end. But it's been a really good bounce back for this group. I feel a lot more confident when certain guys take the mound. I believe At this point, there's about 4 in the circle of trust. I would say Stratton, Shriver, MacArthur, and Serpa are all in the circle of trust. Everybody else is kind of working their way into that spot. But it's hard, to complain about what this bullpen has done. I think they've really steadied things out, and that's all they need to do with this group. I think with the rotation pitching well, the bullpen evening out, maybe the lineup can catch fire, this group is going to be just fine. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, Vinnie Pasquantino has been on a tear at the plate, but did you know he's been equally as good defensively? What can that mean for the future at first base for the Kansas City Royals? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. We want to get a shout out to a couple of sponsors today, and we are going to start with one of the more popular mobile games out there in Monopoly Go. Now, I need you all to listen up for this huge announcement because I have been tracking the leaderboards every day and keeping my eye on the scores, putting all my heart into it, and I'm super pumped to announce I am finally on top, or at least I'm close to the top is what I should say. That's right. Obviously, I'm talking about the hit mobile game Monopoly Go. You've probably heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, and it's a great mobile twist on classic Monopoly. You can play anywhere at any time. You can explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the moon, all while raking in a huge fortune. But my favorite part is the leaderboards, where you can see who's a Monopoly tycoon and who's gone bankrupt. So go get yourself on the charts, download Monopoly Go. It's now free on the App Store and on Google Play. We also want to give a shout out to our title sponsor today in PrizePicks. I told you the NCAA tournament is fully wrapped up. Baseball is fully underway. The NBA playoffs is now underway, so don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your PrizePicks entries, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. Take your pick of more or less and add them to your PrizePicks entries today. You can also get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. Lots of fun stuff going over at PrizePicks, and you can use our code of LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, that code is LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, this morning, as I was prepping to come away with some segment ideas for today's show, I have to credit Jake Eisenberg, a great broadcaster, for the Kansas City Royals. Love all the work that he's done. He's great to listen to. He's been an absolute fantastic addition to the broadcast team in Kansas City. But he put out a tweet that I do want to highlight here about Vinnie Pasquantino. And if you had the chance to watch all of the game last night, you would have seen some excellent defensive plays over there. I mean, he's doing the splits. He's picking balls out of the dirt. He's just becoming a well-rounded player over there. And Jake Eisenberg pointed out that it's not just the eye test here. The analytics test is also thriving with Vinnie Pasquantino. His 5 defensive run saves right now is tied for 3rd in Major League Baseball among all positions. It's 2nd among Major League Baseball for first basemen and leads all American League first basemen. And it's 4 more than any other AL first baseman. 4 more defensive run saves. He is tied for 1st in outs above average among all first basemen, and again leads the American League first baseman. Vinnie Pasquantino always had the bat. That was something you didn't have to worry about. And I think the defense was not really an issue. I never looked at Vinnie Pasquantino and thought liability over there. But I can tell you this. The ceiling just got significantly raised with Vinnie Pasquantino because of that defense. You've heard us talk before about Maikel Garcia and Bobby Witt Jr. And actually, I'm going to throw Kyle Isbell into this conversation. But Maikel Garcia and Bobby Witt Jr. are seen as defensive masterminds. And what they can bring you offensively is good enough to make them, at least for Bobby Witt Jr., a 6-WAR player. Maikel Garcia, probably a 4-WAR player. Now, Kyle Isbell, we talk about all the time. If he's just a league average bat, he can be a 2-WAR or a 3-WAR player because he's that elite defensively. Now you look at Vinnie Pasquantino. I think Vinnie Pasquantino is the most well-rounded and pure hitter. Maybe I should say professional hitter. Because I think Bobby Witt Jr. has the highest ceiling. He's the most talented guy. He's an MVP candidate. Vinnie Pasquantino is not at this point in time. But in terms of an overall approach, 14% walk rate. He doesn't strike out. He hits the ball hard. He hits the ball for power. He can go the other way. Everything about his game just oozes talent. And in a team like this, where Bobby Witt Jr. is going to get a lot of the talk, Cole Reagan's going to get a lot of the talk, I think Vinnie Pasquantino is going to start getting even more than he already was. Because I remember this fun comparison when he first broke into the league, and I thought it was an absolute long shot. But it was Freddie Freeman of the Braves, and then, of course, now the LA Dodgers. And I thought, no, we're not going to put that type of expectation and that type of pressure on a guy that was a late round pick in the draft and hasn't really done it for an entire year yet. And one of my biggest takeaways from that was that Vinnie Pasquantino didn't have the defense that Freddie Freeman had. Freddie Freeman's one of the best defensive first basemen, or at least at that point in time, he was. Freddie Freeman is an excellent defender over there. And now we're starting to see the growth with Vinnie Pasquantino. And for a first baseman, if you are that good defensively and you have this type of bat, his WRC plus is 36 points over the league average. His OBP is north of 350. You are looking at a tremendously talented infield in general. Because now Vinnie Pasquantino goes from a 2-WAR player because of his bat to maybe a 5 to a 6-WAR player as well. Probably more so a 4 to a 5-WAR player. But right now, early on, you are seeing a transformation defensively. You're seeing a transformation defensively from MJ Melendez, and a lot of credit needs to be given to Jose Aguasil and Damon Hollins in this organization. They have done a phenomenal job in making a lot of guys that were not great defensively last year, not just good, but near the top in the league in some categories. MJ Melendez was a mess out in left field last year, but I've given you reasons as to why. He spent an entire offseason as a catcher. Then he learned right field. Then he learned left field. It was a learning curve. Now you're seeing him make very athletic plays out there. He's got a cannon for an arm. He seems like he's found his place out there. Vinnie Pasquantino didn't really look like a liability, but you could see he was a little bit stiff over at first base. Nothing looked like it was just a defensive mastermind out there. Nothing looked like he was going to turn into this 5-time, 6-time Gold Glover. Now, this at least comes into a possibility, considering what he's done through the first 23 to 24 games. Now, he could always fall off, right? Defensive run saves, outs above average, that can always change. You know, you start not fielding as well, you start missing some picks, you start not being able to have big enough ranges, and you can fall off that list. But we've seen Salvador Perez, now with the work of Paul Hoover, become a much better framing catcher. I mean, it's been remarkable what we've seen with a lot of these players who were not just bad defensive liabilities become above average, well above average in some cases. And Vinnie Pasquantino, I now get really excited about because adding that defense to first base makes this entire infield maybe defensively the best in baseball. And if the offense comes around for Garcia, and we know it's going to be there for Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinnie Pasquantino, and Massey just gives you enough, you're looking at one of the better infields in all of baseball. That can be a reach right now, and I totally get it. But in terms of where it could go, that's where a ceiling could be now. And it's a possibility because of what you're seeing defensively from some of these guys. It is wildly impressive. And I think it's something that we should be very excited about. So Jake Eisenberg put out this tweet, and I just started thinking about the possibilities. My Vinnie Pasquantino All-Star projection has a much better chance now because of what he can do in the field. And we're seeing the bat come around a little bit. That, to me, is about as excited as I've been about Vinnie Pasquantino in his young career. Always loved the bat, but now the defense is looking this good and becoming some of the best in the American League at first base. That's something you can certainly fantasize about. Okay, before we move on to our final segment, want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For our final segment, I do want to bring up at least one negative here. Are we getting concerned about some guys out there in the outfield, at least offensively? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the final sponsor today in DoorDash. Now, we do know that Mother's Day is right around the corner, so get something thoughtful for mom on DoorDash. Surprise her from wherever you are with fresh bouquets, the latest technology, gift cards, self-care treats, and more to make her day that much better. It's never too late to show your mom the love on this Mother's Day with DoorDash. Surprise her with those flowers again, the gadgets, the self-care essentials, all in one place, delivered right to her front door. So here's what you need to do. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order. It's up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, and order using DoorDash today. Those terms apply. So get your mother taken care of with DoorDash on Mother's Day. Well, we've had two very positive segments in today's episode, and kind of running up on time here because I got to run out to Kauffman Stadium here rather shortly and give you guys some coverage and some post-game audio later on this evening. But going into tonight's game, I do think there is still one aspect of this lineup, of this team in general, that is becoming a bit more alarming to me. And I feel like when things can get ugly, this is the group I constantly go back to, and it's the outfield. Now, MJ Melendez has had a couple of nice streaks, and we all know about my praise for MJ Melendez, how he was my bounce-back player of the year. I still think that to be a likely scenario because his defense has improved, and I think his offense can get there. Right now, still in a little bit of that slump, though he's been better on the homestand than he ever was on the road trip, which he was 0 for it. But I look at Kyle Isbell. I look at Hunter Renfroe, both guys in the lineup tonight, and I start to wonder, how long can you go this season with those two guys in the lineup? And I look at the depth as well. Dairon Blanco is a fine piece, but he is a fourth outfielder. He is not going to be a guy that you send out there every single day to command center field or to command right field. He is a fourth outfielder. I think what he does is beneficial to this team. He is a great base runner. He's a great base stealer. He's got 80 grade speed, but he's not somebody that you send out there every single day. Kyle Isbell does give you the value defensively. I just don't know how much longer I can hang on to the hope that the bat will become league average, because a great argument that people who are not Kyle Isbell fans have is he's never shown in the full season he can be a league average bat. He has shown stretches where he could be a league average bat. But overall, it's not consistent enough where he can be an everyday center fielder. Hunter Renfroe is hitting under 160. He can run into something from time to time, but you're looking at a guy who's not walking at all. He's not hitting the ball incredibly hard. He's ran into a couple of long balls, but it feels a little bit like Franmil Reyes 2.0. It feels a little bit like Brandon Moss 2.0, Lucas Duda 2.0. Like, it does not appear like it's going to be the bounce back season I at least thought Hunter Renfroe might have had. I saw the reasoning behind it. He was only 2 years removed from a really good year, and I think that was Milwaukee or Boston. And then when he went to the Angels in Cincinnati last year, it wasn't the same. It was clearly a hitter on a decline. And I think that when I look at those two guys in the lineup, I mean, Hunter Renfroe at least can run into one. He is a very powerful hitter, and I will stand by the fact that even in a down year, I think he runs into 20. I think he can give this offense 20 home runs. But it would be nice to do it without hitting under 180. You know, it would be nice to see him get into some form of hot stretch. I thought he had a minor one after he got that first hit of the year. He was really piecing it together, but now back to a little bit of an ice-cold stretch. And I don't think the Royals are anywhere close to giving up on him. He's not playing every single day. He's kind of being an off-and-on guy while he's trying to figure it out. Kyle Isbell, a little bit of the same thing. But I do look at this team and I look at what they could become. Can they reach that point? Can they reach the pinnacle, which is winning this division, getting back to the playoffs? And the reason I say the pinnacle, I don't believe it's a World Series team. I know there's some big-time optimists out there. Let's take it one step at a time. I'm going to quote John Sherman. Let's see what a wild card team looks like before we see what a World Series team looks like. You got to take it step by step. So I think to get to the postseason, they're going to need a hell of a lot more from their outfield than they're getting right now. It's just plain and simple. You can't have two guys in your outfield hitting under 200. And I know batting average isn't the end-all, be-all, but Isbell and Renfroe both don't walk. They don't have a high walk rate. Renfroe's not that great of a defender. Isbell is, but the offense is right now a black hole, to be honest with you. And you hope things can turn around, but the question becomes, how much longer can you wait? How much longer can you really go without production offensively from your center fielder and your right fielder? Because that's when the offense can really start to sputter, that it becomes not just one or two guys, that bleeds into the third guy or the fourth guy, the fifth guy. We saw in this offensive slump, which they're still in, by the way, Vinnie Pasquantino and Salvador Perez has carried the offense. Bobby Witt Jr. a little bit. Michael Garcia is heating up, but everybody else just isn't doing enough right now. Now, if Hunter Renfroe can't cut it, do you put Nelson Velasquez out there? I would hope not, because his defense isn't good whatsoever. He's going to be your DH. In the minor leagues, I'd like to say that Drew Waters can be the guy, and he probably will get the first crack along with Nate Eaton. But at what point do you make that decision? I hope it's easy, and these guys get back on track, and they're giving you more than we expect them to, and the lineup catches fire again. But over the course of 162, is it really possible to do? That is going to be my big question. Not just tonight, but moving forward. When you face some really good arms, can you rely on your center fielder and right fielder to eventually give you production in the dog days of summer when you're maybe in a division race in July or August? Can you do it? These players are going to have to show they can. Because at this point, the benefit of the doubt is not in their favor. You're not going to get the grace period of, it was a tough April, but they can get it going in May. It's put up or shut up time pretty soon here. 24 games is a very small sample size, but I've said the 40-game mark is where you kind of know who a player is going to be. And some of these guys are running out of time, simply put, of becoming an everyday player, of being a guy that you can count on time and time and again. That outfield, offensively speaking, is becoming an issue to me. And things are going to have to change, and they're going to have to change in a hurry. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On Plus, our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Tomorrow, we're probably going to have a breakdown of tonight's game. We're also going to recap, if they play tomorrow, the day game. Did Cole Reagans bounce back? And look ahead to this upcoming AL Central matchup with the Detroit Tigers. But as for tonight, I'll be out there. I'll be answering any questions you guys send my way. Hopefully it can be another win, back-to-back wins for the Royals, and they can earn at least a split of this series. But until later on tonight, you take it easy, Kansas City.